The Boy on Fairfield Street, How Ted Giesel Grew Up to Become Dr. Seuss, by Kathleen Cruel, paintings by Steve Johnson and Lou Francher, read by Callie Verastro. Once upon a time there lived a boy who feasted on books and was wild about animals. No one on Fairfield Street could have said how Ted Giesel, that funny boy, would turn out. No one in the world could have, especially Ted. Ted's father, Theodore Giesel, worked in the family business, but he also helped out at the zoo and eventually was superintendent of parks, which meant he actually ran the zoo. Ted would eat baked beans and bratwurst and thrill to stories of stubborn bears and chattering monkeys, prowling lions and wild wolves. At night, their hoots and cries sometimes found their way into his dreams. Ted's mother, Henrietta Seuss Giesel, helped him find books at the library. Her dream was to get Ted and his sister Marnie into college as the first in their family to go. Perhaps Ted might even grow up to become Dr. Giesel. Each night she lulled them to sleep with stories. Ted would listen curled up with a gift from her, his first stuffed animal, a plump dog he had named Theophradus. All year round, Ted and his best friend Bill would explore Forest Park, with its lily ponds, trout streams, bike paths, and tennis courts. Parades around Springfield were happy days. There was so much to take in: circus acrobats, flashy marching bands with trumpets blasting and drums pulsing, people twirling by on bicycles of all kinds. Ted did begin noticing ways he didn't really fit in around Springfield. His grandparents were German immigrants, and the Giesels were always the outsiders compared with families that had lived there for generations. Events in Europe were causing anger at German Americans here. Thoughtless children at school teased Ted. Sometimes they chased him or beat him up. Certainly, no one he knew seemed to like drawing as much as he did. Sometimes he even drew on his bedroom walls with his crayons. Everyone was horrified, except for his mother. He drew the animals he saw in his father's zoo. He drew imaginary creatures. He drew whatever popped into his head. One day, when Ted was 12 and was doodling as usual, he found himself sketching a funny little cartoon of a man reeling in a giant fish. His parents helped him enter the drawing in a contest run by Springfield Union. Ted won first prize, but when he tried taking an art class in high school, his teacher scolded him for breaking the rules. Ted did break rules. His biggest crime was exaggerating things. The creatures he drew had ears 9 feet long, his horses had wings, his cows could fly as well. His animals looked like plants, and his plants looked like animals. He just had this unusual way of looking at the world, and more often than not, this seemed like a bad thing to other people. Ted turned 13 in 1917, the year that the United States declared war on Germany and entered World War I. He was a proud Boy Scout selling United States Liberty bonds to support the war effort. He collected so much money that he became one of the top 10 bond-selling scouts in the town. Now he was going to receive an award. Ex-President Theodore Roosevelt stirred up the crowd with a speech. Then he walked down the line of scouts, handing out medals and congratulating each one. Ted stood up straight, but when the former president came to him, Roosevelt blurted, "What's this little boy doing here?" It seemed that Roosevelt only had 9 medals, and Ted was the 10th scout in line. No one knew what to do. After a painful silence, Ted was guided off stage. His usual instinct was to be awkward in public, and after that day, he tried to avoid being in public at all. Ted's parents soon learned that he was never going to be studious like his sister Marnie. In class he doodled instead of taking notes. Sometimes he skipped class altogether to go to the movies. Ted did have one teacher who encouraged him, his favorite English teacher. He urged Ted to apply to his old school, Dartmouth College. Many around Springfield were astonished when Ted did make it into Dartmouth, fulfilling his mother's dream. In college, everyone also admired his talent for silliness. He was clearly gifted, though no one knew at exactly what. It wasn't as if men could doodle for a living. It was at Dartmouth that he started using Seuss, his mother's maiden name and his own middle name. Classmates on their way to becoming doctors and lawyers and bankers voted Ted Giesel least likely to succeed. After college, he was plagued with more doubts than ever. Stalling for time, he applied for a prestigious grant to study English literature at Oxford University in England, and led his parents to believe that he was getting in. Unfortunately, someone else got the grant. But Ted's father had already bragged to the editor at the Springfield Union, which published the big news. To save face, Ted's father came up with the money to send his son, the exaggerator, to Oxford anyways. Now Ted was supposed to be doing serious work, studying early Anglo-Saxon poetry and the plays of William Shakespeare. Instead, he was off doodling and scrawling little poems as usual. One day, a classmate he had a crush on looked over his shoulder and whispered, "That's a very good flying cow." Oddly enough, this one remark suddenly put the world into focus. That was him, a guy who loved to draw animals and loved to write verse. With more encouragement from his classmate, Ted decided to leave school. Ted let out a hoot and ran upstairs to tell his parents, with a little exaggeration, that the Post was going to publish all of his drawings from now on. Instead, other magazines started wanting his drawings of creatures, and it all began to feel like a dream. He sent out more drawings than ever. He took to signing his latest work, Dr. Theophratus Seuss, or just Dr. Seuss. The name tickled him. It had that doctor ring to it that he and his family liked so much. By the time August arrived, Ted was packing his suitcase. It was time to say farewell to his parents and take a train to the big city, New York, to find his own place. He found it, a tiny apartment in Greenwich Village. He was 22 years old, and his future looked bright.